Good morning and welcome to this news event hosted by E2. You'll be hearing from four speakers today, and then we'll open the floor for questions during the Q&A period. The Q&A period will be for reporters only, and if you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function and your line will be unmuted when it is your turn to ask a question. For more info and to follow along to today's news event, you can go to the E2 website, which is e2.org/reports, where you can find the news release and Clean Jobs America report. I'll also be dropping that into the chat box here shortly. As I mentioned, you'll be hearing from four speakers today. Our first speaker today will be Bob Keefe, who's the executive director of E2. Our second speaker today will be Phil Jordan, who's the vice president and principal at BW Research. Our third speaker today will be David Turk, who's the deputy secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy. And our fourth speaker today will be Sandra Purohit, who's the federal advocacy director of E2. Let's begin with our first speaker. That's Bob Keefe. He's the executive director at E2. Bob, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Alex. And thanks everybody for joining today, and especially Deputy Secretary Turk, who I see just popped up on my screen. So welcome everybody, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy day for this. So it's a busy week in Washington this week. You all know the news better than I do probably, but as clean energy takes center stage at this week's Leaders Climate Summit on the 22nd and 23rd, and over in Congress in the weeks ahead as they take up the American Jobs Plan, we are releasing today our 5th annual Clean Jobs America report. This is something that we at E2 have been doing in one form or another for almost a decade now, but over the past 5 years, we've been working through the U.S. Energy Employment Report to create our Clean Jobs America reports every year since beginning in 2016. So what we found this year, and some of you have covered this in the past, so thanks for joining us again. What we found this year and this past year is that more than 3 million Americans work in clean energy, still work in clean energy. Now, for perspective, that's more people than work as school teachers, as real estate agents, as farmers, as bankers. And by the way, about 3 times as many people that work in fossil fuels in America right now. Yet, like many sectors of our economy, clean energy was hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and the corresponding economic downturn. Last year was the first year on record since we've been doing this that clean energy saw a decline. At one point, there were about 600,000 clean energy workers all across the country out of work. Fortunately, there was a bit of a rebound that we can talk about here in a minute in the second half of the year, and we ended up the year down about 307,000 clean energy jobs. Now, the good news is that these clean energy jobs are recovering faster than the rest of the economy right now. As I mentioned, in the second half of last year, clean energy jobs surged by about 11%. Across the entire economy, by comparison, jobs increased about 9%. When you look across the different sectors of clean energy, nearly every sector was hurt last year. Unfortunately, with the biggest of them, energy efficiency, also seeing the biggest declines. Energy efficiency jobs across the country fell by about 11%. Renewables, which of course is solar, wind, geothermal, had about a 6% drop. And grid and storage fell 7%, as did clean fuels. Now, that said, there were exceptions. Wind energy jobs, for instance, specifically in wind, increased slightly, adding about 2,000 jobs last year. But the big story actually was in clean vehicles and clean cars. Automakers and suppliers added more than 12,000 jobs, about 12,200 jobs in electric and plug-in hybrid vehicle manufacturing last year, as automakers began to shift to cleaner vehicles that you all have reported on and we've all read about. And the better news is that despite these declines of the past year, the industry is looking better and brighter than ever and is poised for growth like never before. The fact is, President Biden's American Jobs Plan and related climate action that you all know about, including, hopefully, by the way, committing the United States to a significant reduction in greenhouse gases later this week at the Leaders Summit. We are urging at least a 50% decline or at least a 50% commitment by 2030 will increase millions of jobs all across America. But here's the deal, and you all know this. A lot of this only happens if Congress acts. So our message today is that if members of Congress want good paying clean energy jobs in their state, and we know from Clean Jobs America that these jobs are in every state, and by the way, about 99% of every county in this state and every city in this country, if Congress wants to keep those jobs growing and keep attracting those jobs to their states, then they need to support these policies when they get to Capitol Hill, including the American Jobs Plan. As Clean Jobs America 2021 shows, these are jobs that aren't blue state jobs. They're not red state jobs. These are red, white, and blue jobs. Now, the last thing I want to touch on before I turn it over to Phil Jordan and BW to give you some more details is what everybody is, of course, talking about this week and going to be, which is whether President Biden can actually create clean energy jobs and at the levels that we're talking about or that the White House is talking about. And what I would say is this: coupled with action from business, especially lately, President Biden is already creating clean energy jobs. Those 12,000 or so jobs in electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, they probably would not, we know they would not have happened if companies like GM, Ford, Volkswagen, just about every other automaker had not decided in the latter part of last year to switch in a big way to electric vehicles. And you know what? That probably would not have happened at those companies if not for President Biden's emphasis on getting to net zero cars by 2050. Similarly, wind energy, let's look at wind energy, 2,000 or so jobs added there. Remember how the previous occupant of the White House railed about how wind turbines cause cancer and kill all your birds? Well, President Biden has been sending a very different message about wind, and that we're going to add wind because it's a smart thing to do. It's the cheapest source of energy right now, and we're going to do it onshore and offshore. And under his administration, already companies are reacting to that and adding jobs already. And as I mentioned, as these policies begin to wend their way through Congress, hopefully, we're going to see more market signals about the potential for growth in clean energy all around the country. And that's going to result in even greater job gains than we're already seeing or began to see in the second half of last year. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alex to get the show going. Thank you all again for joining us, and we'll be back for Q&A.
Thanks, Bob. Again, that was Bob Keefe, the executive director for E2. And as Bob said, that takes us to our second speaker today, which is Phil Jordan, who's the vice president and principal at BW Research. Phil, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Bob. Today's report really demonstrates the importance of tracking energy jobs on an annual basis, which, as Bob mentioned, we've been doing for some time, so that we're prepared to deal with economic downturns and employment disruptions, just like the ones we've been experiencing the last year, with targeted and effective data-driven solutions. So, similar to prior years, the information in this report is based on the U.S. Energy Employment Report, which, as per Congress, is in the process of being returned to the Department of Energy, where it was administered in 2016 and 2017. The report data from Clean Jobs America from preliminary user data, and the full report is hopefully forthcoming later this quarter perhaps. And we're very excited about how quickly that has been made a priority by this administration. As Bob mentioned, clean energy has been an important driver of the US economy. I wanted to emphasize that it's been an especially important catalyst for small businesses. So historically, about 2/3 of all clean energy workers are employed by companies with fewer than 20 employees. That's a pretty staggering number, right? So I'll say it again, 2/3 of all clean energy workers in this country have been employed by companies with fewer than 20 workers. And the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic fallout that resulted from it, as Bob mentioned, resulted in the loss of more than 300,000 clean energy jobs over 2020. And this shuttered many small businesses across the country. Job losses were significant across most of the segments of the clean energy value chain, so not just the technology areas that Bob mentioned, but construction and manufacturing overall were especially hard hit. And so it is true, as Bob said, that the sector's rebounded better than many industries in the US from its summertime lows, but there's still a long way to go, not only to make up for the hundreds of thousands of lost jobs, but to reclaim the rate of historic growth prior to the pandemic. right? So clean energy is a real job creator on an annual basis. So it's not just the jobs we lost, it's all those opportunity jobs lost as well. So I thought I'd just take a moment to emphasize, I guess, Bob's last point there about the importance of policy. So there is substantial evidence that shows that targeted policies that focus on expanding infrastructure, modernizing the grid, expanding renewables, retrofitting buildings, and other types of infrastructure activities can create lots of jobs, especially when they thoughtfully consider the short-term and long-term transition opportunities for those declining industries and occupations. We saw following the passage of ERA, the stimulus bill that was enacted as a result of the Great Recession a little over 10 years ago, that lots of jobs are created from these types of activities, and a strong suggestion that the Biden-Harris American Jobs Plan, especially when coupled with the exciting, seemingly daily announcements of new and expanded programs at the Department of Energy, will quickly get Americans back to work, will support small businesses, and will refire the growth engine. I'm so pleased that Deputy Secretary Turk is here to talk about those activities. And I'll note that with this annual jobs tracker, right, the annual set your watch to it energy jobs data collection and analysis, we will know precisely how many jobs are created and where those benefits flow and how they're working, so that we can allow for even greater precision around the priorities of the administration and to help the American worker. These things include just transition, obviously the emphasis on unions and unionization, worker and job quality, and equity. So I think with that, I will turn it back over to Alex, and I look forward to any questions that you have during the Q&A period about this comprehensive study that is the result of more than 30,000 interviews with businesses on an annual basis. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Again, that was Phil Jordan, Vice President and Principal at BW Research. That takes us to our third speaker today, which is David Turk, who's the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy. Please begin.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. And thanks, Bob and Phil and Sandra, for not only inviting the department to be with you all today, but thank you for all your work. Incredibly important what you're doing with this Clean Jobs America report. And on behalf of Secretary Granholm and all of us at the Department of Energy, thank you and your team for this very foundational report. You've long used your platform, your numbers, your data to make the critical point that clean energy just isn't good for our planet. It's a boon for our economy, and most importantly for our workers and our communities. And I think that's just reemphasized in today's report. And it shows that there's no doubt of the enormous impact currently from clean energy jobs around the country, literally in every state, Bob, as you mentioned, in communities, but the even larger potential, going forward, the enormous potential going forward that America clean energy holds for job creation throughout our country. As mentioned, the clean energy workforce is already 3 million strong, spread across every single state. And that's such an incredible foundation to build upon. And even as we're grappling with the economic crisis from the global pandemic, as Bob and Phil mentioned, the clean energy jobs are showing a rebound that's outpacing the rest of the economy, just showing the resilience of these jobs. And now what we need to do is supercharge these jobs, as mentioned in the report, through policy and through a variety of mechanisms, and specifically with the American Jobs Plan offered up by President Biden. As we take control over COVID-19, set to reach our ambitious goals of 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2050, we're confident, very confident that the future of clean energy is full, as my secretary says, of job growth. And we're going to make sure it's union job growth as well. President Biden, the rest of us aren't satisfied at just the quantity of the jobs, but very importantly on the quality of the jobs as well. And so we're focused really on two fundamental questions. First, what kind of jobs will create, those quality jobs. And then secondly, where those jobs will be. All of us in the administration know that what we need to do is work day in and day out. This isn't going to be straightforward. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of focus, a lot of discipline to ensure clean energy careers can lift up anywhere, anyone, anywhere in the United States into the middle class. And you see our commitment to do this works in 3 core areas. Let me just outline those of the American Jobs Plan, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to do with this administration, adding millions to this workforce with the hundreds of billions in the investments in the clean energy infrastructure of the future. So 3 core elements quickly to run through. First, we're making sure no one's left behind. Incredibly important. We know that women, people of color, currently underrepresented in the clean energy sector. We also know that there's fossil fuel workers out there wondering if there's a place for them in the future, in the clean energy future facing our country. Just as rural communities around the country, declining industrial communities have felt unseen for too long. Again, we need to focus on all people, all parts of the country, focus on everyone. And we need to engage these communities directly. We need to listen to them. This is not something that's going to be dictated from Washington, D.C. This is one of those areas where we need to have some humility. We need to listen to communities. We need to listen to workers and have place-based strategies that work for particular communities, not just plans and theories that work in the abstract, but efforts, systems, approaches that are going to work in the real world and real communities around the country. And we need to make sure that anyone who wants training or apprenticeships for new jobs can get them, whether it's men, women, people of color, rural parts of the country, or otherwise. So that's point 1, making sure no one is left behind in this clean energy revolution. Secondly, we want these to be union jobs. As I said, the quality of the jobs, higher wages, benefits, supporting healthier, happier families, prosperous communities. That's why the Department of Energy established an Office of Energy Jobs and put such a terrific dynamo in charge with deep labor ties, Jen Kropke, who I suspect many of you know, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know in my few weeks as the Deputy Secretary here at the Department of Energy. It's why we're bringing unions to the table through our labor working group. And it's why the American Jobs Plan proposes for the first time ever to connect clean energy tax credits to good labor standards and really use the leverage that we've got in the US government and the leverage that we've got for the quality of the jobs. And to make sure that the projects financed by the American Jobs Plan support these good paying union jobs, again, across the country. So that's the second point. Third point, and finally, we want to make sure these union workers are installing American-made technology on the supply chain side, on the manufacturing side. This is why we're proposing to invest $300 billion to restore our manufacturing muscle throughout the country and to put it to work building these clean energy products of the future. So we know none of this is easy. We know this is going to require a lot of work. There's certainly momentum, as Bob and Phil went into when it comes to clean energy jobs. So we've got to roll up our sleeves. First of all, we need to get the American Jobs Plan onto President's desk to become law, to have and to unleash this kind of focus, these kinds of investments throughout the country. And we're certainly not here to coast on what's easy. We're ready in the Department of Energy throughout the Biden administration to put in the hard work because to us, success or failure rides on our ability to deliver on these 3 key goals that I outlined. So more than just telling us where we stand, I think this E2 report, this excellent analysis that's been done reinforces really where we need to go and just how important policy and how important what the federal government, what state governments, what companies, what other key decision makers do. And so let me just conclude with a plea of all of you. Let's work together. Let's hold our promises. Let's build equitably. Let's build ambitiously from the baseline that this report provides. If we all work together, we hold each other accountable. Together, we can unleash the world-leading industries, win the clean energy future, give every American a piece of this clean energy prosperity that we're already seeing in communities around the country. For those who haven't looked at the report yet in full, there's community by community, the number of jobs in particular areas. Incredibly useful to understand that this is not just something happened theoretically, this is something impacting communities literally across the country. So thank you again for having me participate. Thank you again for the terrific analysis done today, and certainly look forward to the question and answer session as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And again, that was David Turk, Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy. And that takes us to our fourth and final speaker today, which is Sandra Purohit, who is the Federal Advocacy Director at E2. Sandra?
Very much. Good morning, everybody. Well, the Clean Jobs America report includes over a dozen specific policy recommendations, but for brevity, I'm going to focus on 5 main policy buckets. These were also all addressed in a recent letter from almost 450 E2 business leaders to Congress, urging for bold climate action as an economic imperative. So what are these policies? What are these categories that we really need Congress to pay attention to if the job growth we need is going to become a reality? The first is national infrastructure. Just as in previous generations where Congress now needs to support the networks that will allow the economy to excel in the 21st century. Grid modernization and zero-emission vehicle networks are the interstate superhighways of tomorrow's economy. Smart buildings that improve energy efficiency and connect schools, homes, and businesses are as important to our economic future as ensuring nationwide access to electricity was in the past. That means Congress needs to invest in the Department of Energy grid modernization programs, energy efficiency block grants, zero-emission vehicle infrastructure programs, and as outlined in the report, and as just a start. The second area that we really need Congress to focus on is clean energy tax policy. Despite its price advantage, the market alone will not deploy the level of clean energy and energy efficiency that we need at a rate fast enough to mitigate the daunting economic impacts of climate change. We need to accelerate that transition. The report calls on Congress to provide for longer-term tax incentives for clean energy technologies, including vehicles, storage, US manufacturing of clean energy products, and to ensure those credits can be paid out directly from the Treasury to facilitate their use. As Phil mentioned, a lot of these businesses are small businesses, and that direct pay mechanism can really help improve access. This type of tax policy won't just speed transition, it will also speed up job creation, cost savings, health benefits that come from the clean energy deployment and manufacturing. The third policy area is innovation. During the last financial crisis, federal loans and grants for innovation helped hundreds of companies get started and re-energize thousands more. Tesla, for example, got its start with a Department of Energy loan that it repaid early. Ford retooled its Van Dyke plant to make hybrid and electric vehicle parts, saving 1,200 jobs at the time. Technology innovation soared and consumer energy prices plummeted. If the US is going to compete with the likes of China, which today leads the world in clean energy development, manufacturing, deployment, Congress needs to double down on this approach and leverage bold and aggressive federal investments in the next generation of clean tech, from batteries to low carbon ag, and it needs to be a government-wide approach. The fourth policy area is clean energy financing. Federal investment is going to be critical, but it won't be sufficient to recover from COVID-19 or to mitigate the economic threat of climate change. We need to find ways to bring private capital into the equation in a big way. And policies like the National Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator would address that need by providing for better financing tools for clean energy projects. It'll also ensure something that the Undersecretary touched on, which is minority, rural, and low-income communities can gain access to clean energy and energy efficiency technologies, can fund projects, and can grow jobs across racial and economic lines, as well as geographic ones. It's something that Congress should pass and fully capitalize. The fifth and final policy area, again, was touched on earlier, but really deserves underscoring, and that is workforce training. It won't matter that bold climate action will create millions of new jobs if America doesn't have the skilled labor to benefit from them. The problem is that clean energy businesses are already struggling skilled workers they need. Sorry, just a second. Yep, that's from everything from high efficiency HVAC and heat pump installers to wind technicians. As the clean energy transition expands, that need is only going to grow. Investing in programs like the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity provides workforce training for digital high-tech grid jobs. Passing the Hope for Homes Act, the Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act are all essential to bringing new people into the clean energy workforce. These programs will help address the broader unemployment situation today by providing pathways to careers in a sector that will be growing for years to come. And again, they will help to ensure that minority communities, rural communities, communities transitioning from fossil fuel employment are all part of the clean energy jobs of tomorrow. But tackling the economic costs and harnessing the economic opportunities of climate change make these investments worthwhile by themselves. But with the millions of Americans still out of work or underemployed, they're an absolute necessity. This 5-sector approach to modernizing our network infrastructure, tax, innovation, finance, and workforce training policies will transform our economy. It will grow jobs today, and it will set America on the path of economic success for decades to come. I welcome questions. Thanks.
Thanks. And again, that was Sandra Purohit, Federal Advocacy Director at E2. And that takes us to the Q&A portion of today's event. If you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it is your turn to ask a question. And as a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you are having issues with your own audio or the raise your hand function, you may also use the text-based Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions, although we will be taking live questions from reporters first. Before we do take our first question, I just want to mention that a video recording of today's news event will be made available online later today at e2.org, along with all the other media materials that were made available, including today's news release and report. Again, that website is e2.org. All right, why don't we take our first question today? Our first question today will be from Antonia Uhazi from Southern Lee Magazine. Antonia, please make sure that your line is unmuted.
Sure, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great, thanks for taking my question. It's Antonia Uhas with Southerly Magazine. I'm here in New Orleans, and so I have just a couple of quick questions, which I'll read off real quick. Reporting from Louisiana, one of the things I noticed in the report is how low my state and also Alabama and Mississippi are in the number of clean jobs. And I'm wondering what you understand is the impediments to our states adopting clean jobs, and what the Department of Transportation and others are doing to help overcome these hurdles. And then I'm really interested in unionization. Which parts of the clean energy sector are unionized versus the fossil fuel sector? And I know that, and this is specifically for Deputy Secretary Turk, the Biden administration is really active in encouraging unionization among wind and solar in the clean energy sector. But I'm interested in sort of the lack of a balanced playing field, given that particularly extraction of oil and natural gas is a non-unionized sector in the US. And so what's happening to look at unionization across the entire energy production playing field? And that's it. Thank you.
Well, this is Bob Keefe with E2. Thank you for that, Antonia. I think as the token guy with a Southern accent, I'll take the first part of that question, but maybe I'll leave the union question for Deputy Secretary Turk and Phil Jordan, who studies this stuff deeper than I do. But I think that the question, it's great because one of the last pre-COVID trips I took was to New Orleans and to Louisiana, and I spent some time for various reasons at Abita Brewery and talked to the owners there, and all of the solar and clean energy that they're putting on their facilities down there. But there's certainly a demand. There's a desire by certainly the people of New Orleans specifically, but throughout Louisiana for cleaner energy. The problem is what I would say is this: it comes down to policy. And I happen to hail from North Carolina, which has the only renewable portfolio standard in the Southeast. As a result, North Carolina is in the top 10 of those jobs, top 10 in the country for clean energy jobs, mainly in solar. That's because of policy that was passed in North Carolina years ago. There's no reason, though, and the sun doesn't shine any brighter in North Carolina than it does in Louisiana or Alabama, for that matter. And by the way, the wind blows pretty good off of the coast of Louisiana and Alabama as well. There's no reason that those jobs shouldn't be happening in your state and surrounding states, except for the fact that there has not been the constructive policy from those states at the state level to date. The good news is, with the Biden administration coming in now, we are going to see some of these changes on a federal level, which will hopefully bring states like yours up the ranks and join the rest of the country in this clean energy growth. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Secretary Turk for the rest.
Well, thanks, Antonio, for the question. Let me make a few points. One, I think it's important to underscore, and I think this report does a nice job, of the diversity of clean energy jobs. It's not just solar PV and it's not just onshore wind. And if you think of Louisiana, and I had a very good discussion with Senator Cassidy on this in a private meeting before my hearing before the committee that he's a part of, the Energy Committee. There's, just as Bob was mentioning, there's offshore wind, of which we've got a very ambitious 30 gigawatt target from the Biden administration. And that's a huge opportunity, including for some skill sets of workers in the oil and gas sector as well on the offshore wind side. Another opportunity in Louisiana, just trying to think place-based, is hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. There's an awful lot of interesting opportunities on hydrogen to take existing infrastructure, whether it's natural gas produced hydrogen and doing what's called blue hydrogen, to building out the green hydrogen through electrolysis with renewables, whether it's solar PV or wind, including offshore wind into the future as well. A lot of, again, skill sets for workers today that might be incredibly attractive going forward. So you need to have these place-based strategies and really to engage in communities, as I said, in a very aggressive but humble way in terms of listening to the communities in terms of what jobs might work in those communities. And then on the union side, again, just underscoring, it's not just the quantity, it is the quality. It does require leadership, just as Bob was saying, whether from the federal level or state level or local level. From our end, I think everyone's heard very clearly from President Biden his commitment on the union jobs front and the quality jobs front. We've certainly been implementing that at the Department of Energy, including with our new Office of Energy Jobs. And there's all sorts of levers, at least from the federal government side of things, that we can use, whether it's federal procurement levers, other kinds of things, much of which, of course, is in the American Jobs Plan, to really ensure that it's not just quantity, it's quality as well. And it just requires smart policy, as Bob was mentioning. Sandra had some good lines about this in her presentation as well. And it's going to require political leadership at varying levels of government to make this happen.
Thank you.
Great. Let's take our next question. Our next question comes from David Ferris at E&E News. David, please unmute yourself. You're now live. David, we still can't hear you. Oh. David, are you there? They're having troubles with David's microphone. When we come back to David, we will take our next question now from Judith Kohler at the Denver Post. Judith, you're now live. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. I wanted to follow up on the issue of unions. I think Phil mentioned that 2/3 of the businesses employ 20 or fewer people. So just wondering how you envision those kinds of jobs being unionized, I guess. Doesn't that kind of, it's a little trickier, isn't it, if a lot of the businesses are smaller?
Yeah, Bob, you want me to jump in? Answer that
Sure.
one? Great. Yeah, it's a great observation. What I would say is that where we've seen the most encouraging activity in terms of unionization across the clean energy sector has been in the development of project labor agreements across the offshore wind projects throughout the Northeast in particular and along the Eastern Seaboard. There's essentially commitments and opportunities for subcontractors working on those projects with large project developers. And the commitment is to essentially hire union workers for those positions. While it's true that the segments of the economy that have higher unionization rates do tend to be larger employers and do tend to be focused around things like utilities, there are lots of levers that can be pulled that can facilitate labor organizing and hiring of union workers. So the challenge, in my opinion, that it'll be much more challenging as we think about residential markets. So thinking about residential energy efficiency or distributed PV, which are a lot of the very small companies. But I think that part of what we're seeing already happening on the ground is that in the commercial building space and the utility scale deployments of renewables, we're seeing that activity already. The other thing that I would note is that one of the strategies that appears to be in place, from an outsider's view of the policies that are sort of just starting to take shape, right? We're still pretty early in the administration, and a lot of the folks who are being appointed are just getting in the door, and in many cases a virtual door still because of the pandemic. I think that there's a strategy forming that says, hey, look, there's some segments that have high unionization rates, like say pipeline construction as an example, where maybe you have a higher unionization rate. And so if you look at the American Jobs Plan as an example, right, there's a lot of activities that are sort of very closely adjacent to clean energy, but are things like we're gonna replace all the lead pipelines, right? Which is pipeline construction work in a short-term, immediate need all across the country, wherever there's lead pipes and wherever there's modernization that needs to happen. So there's immediate work for those individuals. And then, as Deputy Secretary Turk mentioned, the opportunities around hydrogen and underground carbon storage are maybe a little bit further out. So the investments in the plan now are really about facilitating and fostering the growth of those industries, which then, by the time we get all those lead pipelines replaced and get all the water infrastructure done that we need to get done, then there's a brand new industry of pipeline construction and repair for things like hydrogen and underground carbon storage. So I think that there are multiple ways that you sort of address the unionization question. I think a lot of that, directly to your answer about small businesses, a lot of that will be through the subcontracting process and specific project labor agreements that emerge as a result of policies. It will require some policy to do it, right? Because as you mentioned, a lot of those industries are, a lot of those companies are smaller and maybe not in highly unionized sectors. So it will require some policy to do it. But I would suggest that we start with the commercial buildings where there already is a fair amount of, in the new construction, already a fairly high unionization number, as well as utility scale solar and wind, which we're seeing increasing unionization rates over the years as we move forward.
Thank you.
This is Bob Keefe. The only thing I'd add, and certainly would defer to Deputy Secretary Turk if he had comments as well, but I would also say that, look, this is the opportunity to do this. We, as the Biden administration has made very clear, we don't want to just create jobs. We want to create good paying jobs that stay here in America. And there's no better way to do that than by encouraging unions in things through PLAs, project labor agreements, through prevailing wage standards, through local hire provisions, for instance. And we also have the opportunity to make sure that these jobs continue to grow in places where that traditionally may have been passed over, communities of color, with people of color. We can do that with things like, enhanced training for communities of color for these jobs of the future. We can make sure that host facilities, communities where these solar plants go, or solar farms go up, or wind farms go up, or manufacturing plants go up, that they directly benefit those local jobs and those local communities. This is the opportunity to do that. We need our policymakers to step up and seize that opportunity.
So maybe if I can just add a couple additional words on what Phil and Bob said. One is we've really got to focus on the temporal piece. And Phil, I thought your answer was particularly good about that. We need to focus on those near-term opportunities, as well as thinking about those jobs 5, 10, 15 years down the road as well. And think about it in a more comprehensive fashion than certainly policymakers, I think, have done so to date. And I think we're capable of doing that. And then secondly, I think we need to think about the historic window of opportunity that we're in. And there's nothing inevitable here. There are a lot of levers. Phil and Bob mentioned several of them that can be utilized. That's what's envisioned within the American Jobs Plan to try to ensure that these are quality jobs going forward, and to try to take full advantage of the different levers and the different mechanisms going forward. And if we see that there are some challenges, we need to be roll up the sleeves, work hard, and think about how to fix that going forward. So I'll just leave it there.
And why don't we try to take our next question from David Ferris. I know David was having some troubles with his microphone and submitted his question in the question box. His question from E&E News is, on the electric vehicle jobs, how much of those are actually new jobs and how much are internal combustion engine jobs that converted to EV jobs?
Phil, do you have any insight on that? I don't
Yes.
think I do.
Yes. So in the survey, we do actually break out across all the different categories, the sort of the nature of the job and how, whether it was a new job created. I don't have the precise number for that subsegment here, though I do know from reviewing the data that a number of those jobs are in the supply chain, and the electric vehicle supply chain is actually quite distinct from it's really quite distinct from the traditional auto. So the majority of these would be new jobs. I can't give you a precise number. I can follow up with you, David, as needed when I actually run the number. But I'm certain that it's a majority of those jobs are new jobs.
And why don't we take our next question? The next question comes from Miles McCormick at Financial Times. Miles, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Hi, folks. Thanks very much for hosting this and for doing the report. All very helpful. 2 questions, if I may. First one for Bob. So the numbers in this report are brilliant. I'm wondering, do you have any kind of numbers based on the outlook for how you see clean energy jobs transforming over the coming 5-10 years, assuming the Biden policies are enacted and brought into being? And second question for Deputy Secretary Turk. Is there any concern in the administration that to some extent some of these clean energy jobs are less labor intensive perhaps than fossil fuel jobs of the past might have been, in that, for example, post-construction, when a wind turbine is operational, it requires a lot less manpower to keep it in operation than perhaps an oil rig might have in the past? And how do you deal with that dilemma? Thanks.
Great, thank you for the question, and thanks for joining us today. we don't do projections in this report. This is literally, or almost literally, counting noses, counting people that are on the ground right now. We did do a report late last year called Build Back Better, Faster, which was done before the Biden administration was the Biden administration. So we didn't know the specifics, obviously, of some of the plans that we're seeing now coming out of the White House and beyond. But back then, what we did was we looked closely, and with Phil's help, by the way, so he can help out with this if there's detailed questions. But we looked at what the $90 billion of the stimulus did back in the Obama administration. And we know from that there was something north of a million or so jobs created in clean energy because of that. So what we did in our report is we looked at something just a little bit bigger, but still in keeping with that. And we looked at what would happen if you invested about $100 billion, $99 billion actually, to be exact, in clean energy programs. And what we found was that we would create about 860,000 jobs, drive about 330 billion in economic activity, and add about 66 billion to the GDP. Now, again, that was for $100 billion worth of investment. What we're talking about in the American Jobs Plan, and the Deputy Secretary can correct me if I have these numbers wrong, but we're talking about $100 billion investment in grid modernization alone. We're talking about 174 billion, I think, in EV and infrastructure improvements. And that's not including some of the gains that we know we'll see from changes in the tax codes and extensions of the PTC and the ITC, and certainly doesn't track the jobs and the innovation that's going to come out of some of the innovation investments that DOE is already teeing up. That, as Sandra mentioned earlier, back in the last time we did this, we created a little company called Tesla, for instance, which I think has 50,000 or so jobs right now. So the long-winded answer to your question is, no, we don't have those projections, but we know it's going to be a lot of jobs based on what we have seen in the past and some of the modeling we've done since then. And then I'll turn it over to the Deputy Secretary for the second half of your question.
Thanks, Miles, for the terrific questions, and maybe a little bit more on your first question. There's been a number of other organizations that have done work here as well to try to quantify the job opportunities. One that I'm familiar with, which was my old employer as of 4 weeks ago with the International Energy Agency, did a big report last year with the IMF looking at what sustainable recovery stimulus type investment around the world would yield, not only in terms of carbon reductions, GDP growth, but very specifically looking at the number of jobs created, increased going forward over these next few years, if the kinds of policies that are now outlined in the Biden American Jobs Plan are implemented. I know that the IEA is set to update that analysis, including the jobs analysis for net zero, if countries actually implement their net zero commitments. I think that report's coming out in middle of May or so. So there's some good jobs numbers in there, Miles, not only for the U.S. but internationally as well, that you might look to. But quite impressive, the numbers and the diversity of those jobs as well. To your second question, I think it's important to underscore two pieces. One, and just as Bob mentioned, I think the American Jobs Plan outlines this and really highlights this in a way that maybe was not highlighted before, of just the magnitude of what we're looking at here. If we really want to invest in the infrastructure we need to invest in, we need to have that competition, including and especially with China, and we need to build those jobs in those economies and those industries of the future. So we're looking at a scale here, a historic opportunity in terms of the scale. The other piece, which I think addresses your question as well, it's a diversity of jobs. So it's not just the solar installer, it's not just what people think about sometimes. Quite striking in the report is how many of these clean energy jobs are actually in efficiency, right? A lot of people think it's just all renewables, but efficiency is the biggest share of the clean energy jobs right now, and would be going forward. And it's not just the, even in renewables, it's not just the installation piece as well. The American Jobs Plan offers up opportunities on the manufacturing front. Huge amount of investment in manufacturing and the full supply chain, as Secretary Granholm has stressed again and again, not only externally in media appearances, but internally as well. So there's a whole diversity of jobs, and then the magnitude of what we're talking about here. But hopefully, to your first question, Miles, we'll have more and more good analysis out there, but just what this means looking into the future.
Thanks very much.
Unmute there. Why don't we take our next question, which comes from Ryan Young at CNN. Ryan, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. Ryan, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. All right. Why don't we try coming back to Ryan later? We do have additional questions that we can take from the Q&A box. Our next question comes from Audrey Henderson at Energy News Network. Audrey asks, will there be more reporting on training and education for clean energy jobs, especially for Black and Indigenous people of color and low-income communities?
This is Bob Keefe with E2. I'm not sure who you're asking the reporting would come from, whether from us or from DOE or others. I do know that we're going to be releasing something called Diversity in Clean Energy, a report in probably the next month or so that goes a little deeper into some of this data, specifically around how many people of color and breakdowns by gender work in clean energy jobs. The fact of the matter is clean energy has a diversity problem. It's also a diversity opportunity. As we roll these policies out, we can create more jobs for people of color all across America. But I don't know if that was something that was directed at E2 or DOE.
So let me just add, Bob, to what you said, and I like the term diversity opportunity. There's huge opportunities here. And this is certainly very much consistent on how President Biden ran during the campaign, and all the policies implemented, the programs implemented, and certainly throughout the American Jobs Plan is really focusing on the training, focusing on the education, focusing on the apprenticeships, other opportunities, but also following through on that with the kind of investments that we need. Again, thinking in a very place-based kind of way, focusing on all communities, focusing on those communities that have not received as much benefit from the employment front in the clean energy revolution that's happening as we need to. So it's a moral imperative. It's also pragmatically makes sense to do that as well in terms of the outcomes. So it's definitely a top priority for this administration.
And I'll just chime in and add one other piece, which is that while the focus is on, we've spoken a lot about workforce training, things like access to financing is also a big part of that, because the more projects that we can have developed in communities of color, developed in rural communities, in communities of transition, that these will actually enhance the job creation opportunities in those communities. So it's not just workforce training, it's also making sure that the projects are there for them to have a job where they live. And that finance piece is in the American Jobs Act. It's a part of what we're asking for in Congress. I think it's an important component of that.
And I'll just chime in as well here to just note that Deputy Director for Energy Justice and Secretary's Advisor on Equity, Shalonda Baker, is I guess, relatively new appointment in this administration. She is intently focused on all issues around equity, including citing workforce impacts of communities, and really sort of taking the charge in an enormous amount of work. And I think really elevating the work of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that's existed at DOE for some time. The National Association of State Energy Officials, CDAC, HBCU, and my firm have been working with DOE for the last year or so on a diversity and energy study that looks at many of these questions. I believe that is being released in May. It's a bit more, I think it follows your sort of your direct questions around some of the prescriptions and areas where there need to be targeted interventions, and looks really specifically around the talent pipeline and how DOE can support the talent pipeline specifically. So I think the answer to your question is that, you know, this Department of Energy under Secretary Granholm is obviously taking this issue very seriously, has a position carved out to look exactly at what the questions that you have. And as we think about whether it's the IEA report or the E2 reports or any of the other reports that are coming out showing the tremendous opportunity for clean energy job growth by meeting the decarbonization goals of the administration in the states, we're talking about an enormous number of jobs. And we're going to need to draw on supply from communities that have been historically disinvested in, and that includes communities of color. So I think there's an economic imperative, there's an equity imperative, there's all kinds of imperatives. So it's really important that we get this right. And very pleased to know that DOE is taking it so seriously.
Alex, I know we're running out of time, but did we get Ryan Young back?
Ryan still has his hand up. Ryan, if you'd still like to ask your question, please unmute yourself now. Well, it doesn't look like his function is working today.
I spent a lot of years as a reporter myself. I've never been to a press conference where a reporter had a problem unmuting themselves. It's a new world.
New world here. Well, we just want to make sure that reporters online have one last chance to pose their questions. As a reminder, if you'd wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function and your line will be unmuted when it is your turn to ask a question. We will try our best to get to any additional questions. We want to make sure where you can get more information following today's news conference. To connect with any of the speakers you've heard from today, to get more information, you can contact Alex Frank, that's myself, at 703-276-3264. And a recording of this news event will be made available later today online at the E2 website. That's e2.org. And I believe that's it in terms of questions. Bob, if you had any last minute thoughts before we close for the day, now would be the time.
Only to say thanks. Thanks to all of you for attending. Thanks, of course, to our great panelists here. Deputy Secretary Turk, thank you for joining us. Sandra, for the insight and keeping us straight on federal policy, and Phil for all your work in putting these numbers together and making them make sense for everybody. Thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Yep.
Take care.